Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai, ko Gina Jewel toka wingawa. He mihi ki te Manafenoa, ko te Aotearoa. Welcome to the Future of the Southern Landfill webinar. I've acknowledged Te Aotearoa as Manafenoa of Poneki, Wellington. When we think about the focus of tonight's webinar, considering the future of the Southern Landfill, it is very much about kaitiakitanga, the need to protect and look after the environment. We all have a role to play in this. Tonight's webinar is an opportunity to learn more about the significant consultation that forms a part of the Wellington City Council annual plan. It is also an opportunity for you to have your questions answered. Before we hear from our speakers, I'd like to run through the agenda and some housekeeping for this evening. The webinar will run for about an hour. If we need to, we might extend it a little past that time. In terms of the questions, many of you have asked some questions already, and we will answer those in the Q&A session. You can also ask questions throughout the webinar, and we will answer as many of those as we can tonight. If we don't get to all of them, we will answer them via email as soon as possible following the webinar. You can ask questions during the webinar using the Q&A button on your screen. These will be handled by the team working behind the scenes. Some will be answered as we go, and others I'll put to our panel to respond to live during the webinar. A video recording of the webinar will be uploaded to the Wellington City Council's Let's Talk website as soon as possible after the event. It does take a wee bit of time just to add the captions, but you can expect to see it there in the next few days. Before I go any further, I'd like to introduce Wellington Mayor Andy Foster to speak. Pass it over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Gina, and tēnā koutou katoa, everyone, and welcome and thank you for investing some of your time to discuss this really important issue for our city. And what we're talking about is what we do with our waste, and it is our waste. It's every one of us's waste. It's what we all try to reduce the amount of waste that we produce. We try and recycle, we try and compost, we do all of those kind of things, but ultimately there's always an amount of residual waste. And what we need to do is to try and reduce the amount of that, both because it's wasteful of resources, but also because residual waste has got to go somewhere or something's got to be done with it. And that's what the conversation that we're having tonight is all about. The Southern Landfill, which we might take for granted, is running out of space, and it's also running out of consent time. Both of those are expected to expire the consent expires in 2026, and that's about the time that the space in the landfill will expire. So the question is what we do thereafter with our residual waste. And a lot of work's been done to look at the various different options, and we've narrowed it down essentially to 3 different options. All of them have their pluses and their minuses, and I'll just quickly go through those. The first one of them is to close the landfill down and to transport our waste to some other place. You can obviously see that would have both significant impacts into the transport, but would also mean that Wellington's waste will be going to some other jurisdiction who might not be that keen on receiving it. The second option is to incinerate the majority of our rubbish, but there would still be some residual left. And the third one is to extend the landfill. The proposal that we've got in front of us includes extending the landfill, what we call a piggyback option. It's a relatively small extension of the landfill rather than a much bigger one, which was being proposed earlier on, which would have taken the landfill all the way up the Carey's Gully towards the main ridgeline towards the Landia. The other thing that we need to do is, what we're trying to do is to minimise the amount of waste that we produce. To do that, we also need to deal with our sludge, and that's the byproduct of sewage treatment. And so we're working very hard on a solution for that. It's a big, complicated process, but essentially what happens at the moment is that the sludge is deposited in the landfill, and because it's wet, it needs a lot of other material to mix with it. So it's 1 part of sludge to 4 parts of other waste. And that's about where we're at the moment. So if we're going to reduce our waste, we also need to deal with the sludge, because we can't reduce our waste without reducing the sludge. So we're trying to deal with both of those, and we're aiming to have a sludge treatment plant in place also by 2026. The landfill it accounts for about 80% of the council's emissions and about 4% of the city's emissions. So it's a significant issue there. We're obviously trying to reduce our carbon emissions. And at the moment, we are paying between $2 and $3 million a year to offset those carbon emissions from the landfill alone. So that's a cost we want to avoid. It's an impact on the environment that we want to avoid as well. So the general direction that we're trying to take is we want to reduce our footprint on the planet. Part of that is reducing the amount that we use of all sorts of different resources, and part of that also is reducing the impact of where we put the waste after we finish with everything. So this is a really important discussion for the city, and we're trying to do this in a way which integrates decisions which we make around the landfill, around sludge treatment, and also around waste minimisation. So I look forward to hearing the conversation tonight and the feedback you have now, but also the feedback you're going to make in terms of submissions later on. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Mayor Foster. Shortly, I'll introduce tonight's panel, who will give a brief overview of what the consultation is about and why we need to hear from Wellingtonians. We'll go through your questions and then we'll cover off how to have your say by making a submission. We'll also run through next steps, the timeline, so you know what happens after the consultation has finished. But first, let's talk a bit about our audience tonight and the things that you have said that you want to hear about. It's great to see about 50 of you joining us tonight, registering for the webinar. We appreciate you making the time to join the webinar and be part of this discussion. About half of you are from neighbouring suburbs of Aftercare Bay and Brooklyn. Many others are registered are Wellington City residents. We've got a few from the Greater Wellington region, and we have also 3 people from environmental organisations. Welcome to you all. You see here on the slide some of the key themes of the questions you've asked us, and we'll be starting our panel discussion with those questions after we hear from our speakers. But first, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Siobhan Proctor. Siobhan has worked in both the electricity and transport sectors before joining Wellington City Council to take on the responsibility for the city's roading, property, waste and water assets. She sees the Southern Landfill as a critical piece of Wellington City's infrastructure and views reducing waste as a key to extracting the most value from it as the city's waste disposal option of last resort. Stefan Borowy. Stefan has a background in waste management in the UK and New Zealand in both the public and private sectors. He has a vision where we don't produce any waste at all. And I think that's something that we'd all like to see. And sees this work around the future of the Southern Landfill as moving towards that goal. Our third speaker is George Feature. George's work history is in recycling and resource recovery, keeping materials out of the landfill. He sees Wellington City heading towards a zero waste future, where the landfill is actually no longer required. He views this work as an interim measure to achieving that zero waste goal. We've also got a technical expert on hand, Robert Hon, Waste Operations Engineer, should there be any technical aspects to the question that we need to draw on his expertise. They're all joining us tonight to outline the options we have for the future of the Southern Landfill and to answer your questions. I'll now pass over to Siobhan Proctor and the team to talk us through the options and why we are asking you, people of Wellington, to tell us your views. Siobhan, if I could pass over to you now.
Lovely, thank you, Gina. And hello to everyone. It's always a very strange experience speaking at a screen, but thank you very much for giving up your time to listen to this webinar, and I hope we can answer all your questions. So what's the issue? Well, as Mayor Foster touched on, our resource consent for the Southern Landfill expires in June 2026. It's also the same time that we're forecasting our landfill to be at capacity, so to have no more space to take any more of our residual waste. So we really need a solution as soon as possible to ensure that we've got a place to dispose of our residual waste. And when we talk about residual waste, we're talking about that waste that's left after we reduce, reuse and recycle as much as we can. So we've undertaken quite an analysis to get to this phase. So we've got 3 options in front of you that we're consulting on, and Stefan will go over this in more detail in a little while. We want to acknowledge Manafenoa and our partnership with Manafenoa. We have recently signed up to some joint priorities. One of the joint priorities we have is to co-design waste minimisation efforts with Manafenoa. So we are working with them in this particular area, as well as developing our waste management and minimisation plan, which I'll cover off as well. So we've shared our multi-criteria analysis, and we've gone through that, and we've also described how we've landed on the shortlist and preferred option with our Manafenoa partners. So we were off to a slow start in terms of partnering, but I think we're on quite a steady footing now. So our engagement and approach is well defined, and we look forward to working with them as our partners in this. So sludge. So what is sludge? Many of you will know what sludge is, but sludge is really the byproduct from our sewage. So we've got 2 waste treatment plants in Wellington, one in Karori, one at Moa Point. All our sewage goes there, it gets treated, the wastewater is treated and then disposed of, and what's left over is this porridge-like consistency called sludge. And we currently pipe that to Kerry's Gully, to the southern landfill. And you may remember back in March 2020, the pipes failed, so we actually had to truck that from Moa Point to the southern landfill, which caused a huge amount of inconvenience and disruption, and was not great from an environmental perspective at all. We need to deal with sludge. We produce 15,000 tonnes per year, and one of the constraints on our waste minimisation efforts is the fact that we have to mix this sludge, 1 part sludge with 4 parts waste. So for every tonne of sludge we want to dispose of, we have to mix 4 tonnes of waste. So what we've done over the last couple of years is we've gone through quite an extensive business case process where we've looked at what we need in terms of what are the options for dealing with this sludge. And what we've come up with is a project which will look at us putting in a sludge minimisation facility at Moa Point. So really working with the wastewater treatment plant to basically process our sludge. There's a number of processes this sludge will go through, and what it will do will actually reduce the amount of sludge to about 2,500 tonnes, so about 16% of what we currently produce, and it actually converts it into these coffee-like granules, and that may be disposed of at the southern landfill, or we may be able to find different uses for that. So we know overseas they do find different uses for this byproduct, so that'll be another work stream that we have to get underway. So this project is well in the design phase now. We're going to be seeking resource consent relatively soon, and the funding will actually be, we're financing this off our balance sheet. So Crown Infrastructure Partners, we're discussing with them for central government funding of this, but it will be collected from ratepayers via a levy, and that consultation is closed. So waste minimisation. So whilst we're focusing on a residual waste disposal solution for Wellington, we also need to reduce or avoid making waste in the first place. So alongside this project that we've got, which is looking at what we do with our landfill, we've also got quite an extensive waste management and minimisation plan. So we are operating in our current one, which was set up in 2017. And as part of that plan, we're progressing a range of waste reduction initiatives, such as battery recycling, waste education in schools, capital compost, and also operating our tip shop. We're also planning some key projects that are going to help us significantly reduce waste in the long term, including the expansion of the existing resource recovery network and a comprehensive review of our curbside collection services. Alongside this, we're planning for our next waste management and minimisation plan, which is going to focus on further waste reduction and measures to address the carbon impact of waste. So we've got an awful lot going on in this space. We've committed to co-designing the plan with Manafenoa and also including and involving stakeholders as well to make sure that we get the waste minimisation and management plan that's going to see us through for the next few years. So I'll hand over to our wonderful waste operations manager, Stefan, now, and he'll take you through the process we use to arrive at the options that are before you tonight.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Kia ora koutou. Just move on to the next slide. So this slide provides an overview of the activities that we've undertaken to ensure that we have a residual waste disposal solution for Wellington in place by 2026. And as you can see, the work started back in 2009 when the council approved the long-term plan, funding for the extension of the landfill in the long-term plan. In 2013, the council lodged the resource consent application to extend the landfill into the new area of the valley further up Carey's Gully. However, between 2013 and 2019, there were severe concerns about this option, and it was scrapped. In 2019, a new concept was developed, and it was decided to review this against all other possible solutions for our residual waste. In 2020, we commenced a two-step multi-criteria analysis, creating a shortlist. And I'll explain a little bit more about that multi-criteria analysis later on. It was then decided early in 2022 that council would publicly consult on 3 possible residual waste disposal options as part of the 2022 annual plan, as we're doing in this webinar today. So what is a multi-criteria analysis? Well, it's a decision-making tool which is used to evaluate multiple options by assessing their effects, performance, impacts, and trade-offs. It's commonly used by governments and businesses, and it's auditable, and therefore a very transparent decision-making tool. The process uses a number of set criteria and considerations which are given a level of importance. Each option is then scored against the criteria, generally by a panel of technical experts. The process ranks the options in order of preference from the one that addresses the most criteria to the one that addresses the least. And we use multi-criteria assessments in our daily lives. For example, when buying a car, you might consider the size of the vehicle, whether it's electric or uses fossil fuel, whether it's expensive or cheap, what the future maintenance costs might be, and the safety features. And then you might look at what vehicles are available and consider each against the criteria before reaching a decision. And ideally, the vehicle you buy would tick most of the boxes and rank the highest. So in our multi-criteria analysis, we developed a list of 14 possible options to deal with residual waste beyond 2026. These ranged from highly technical solutions such as gasification, mechanical biological treatment, and waste incineration through to landfill extension or no landfill at all. Some of these options were more about waste reduction and not a solution for the disposal of residual waste. For example, a material recycling facility only treats the recyclable portion of the waste stream, and the mechanical biological treatment facility only deals with the organic fraction. And so while both technologies have direct application to waste reduction, they do not deal with the residual waste that is left over. So these options were assessed against a set of criteria. A residual waste working group was developed to create the criteria and then assess the options against these criteria. And you can see the list here, and they ranged from Te Ao Maori alignment through to community outcomes, technical and financial aspects. The critical criteria, or the core criteria, which each option would have to achieve, we selected 3 of those, and they were scalability. And this, each option would need to allow for fluctuations in waste tonnages and support waste minimization in particular. Also, time frame for implementation. The option needed to be in place by June 2026, when the current resource consents run out. And finally, technical maturity. We needed a solution which was able to be implemented in the New Zealand context. So once we'd assessed the options against our criteria, 2 options were shortlisted. And these were the landfill extension, our piggyback option, and a waste to energy plant or incineration. However, it was requested that we consider the option of no landfill at all, or closing the landfill, and in effect transporting our residual waste to other landfills in the Wellington region or beyond. So this resulted in 3 options being carried forward in the annual plan consultation. And these are the options that we are seeking your feedback on. Option 3, landfill closure. As you can see, there are a range of advantages with landfill closure, which includes scalability and no requirement for capital funding. But there are significant disadvantages with this option. Most importantly, transferring our waste and the environmental effects of that waste to other communities, and not having a facility to dispose of waste in Wellington City in the event of an emergency. Option 2, waste to energy, incineration. There are a range of advantages with this option, which include potentially initial lower environmental effects and reduced aftercare post-closure. But the main disadvantages with this option are that it needs a certain tonnage of waste to be economically viable. So it doesn't fit in with our waste reduction plans. It also requires a big capital investment with higher operating costs, which could potentially have an impact on rates. And option 1, the landfill extension, the piggyback option. And this is our preferred option, and it has more advantages than the other options. It does not require a minimum tonnage, so we can proceed with our waste reduction program. And if we're successful with that program, we may be able to close a landfill earlier. It will be operational by June 2026 when the current landfill reaches capacity. And it provides a city with a disposal option in the event of an emergency. It provides us with resilience. However, we acknowledge that there are still some environmental and local community effects that will need to be managed, and there will be aftercare required when the landfill is closed. So this slide shows how the different options scored against the criteria. The piggyback option scored the highest at 119 out of a maximum score of 160, followed by no landfill at 92 and waste to energy at 87. So to summarize, each option, landfill extension is robust, scalable, mature, and fits with our required time frame, and it provides resilience to the city, but it requires environmental controls. No landfill is an easy and cheap option for Wellington City, but it transfers our problem to other communities. And energy to waste could potentially reduce environmental effects to land and greenhouse gas emissions, but it needs waste to feed the beast. So we cannot proceed with our ambitious waste reduction plans. So what will the landfill extension look like if it's selected as the option? So this video shows the landfill once it's completed and the surrounding areas. The green mound in the front is the proposed piggyback option after landfilling has been completed. The piggyback option is on top of an area that has been previously landfilled, sometimes called stage 2. The smaller green mound in the back is the area where the current landfilling is taking place and is estimated to be filled by 2026. So in this view, we look to the north. The Brooklyn wind turbine is located up the valley on the ridge. To the right is the T&T clean fill operation, and to the bottom left is the C&D landfill. The blue pond is where stormwater from the site will be captured and then treated through a wetland to the right, the mustard area, and then discharged to the Ofero stream below. So as we go around the proposed piggyback option, we will see the surrounding areas to the east, south, west, and north. Over to you, Gina.
Kia ora. Thank you for that overview. Thanks very much, Stefan and Siobhan, and for letting people know the importance of them having their say on this important issue for our city. We've received a lot of questions, both from before the webinar started and we're getting them during the webinar. We'll now ask the panel to respond to as many of those questions as possible. We'll start with the most frequently asked question. The first question we've got is from Alison, and I'll put this to Siobhan. Can you assure us that there will be a drastic reduction in the amount of waste leading to a phasing out of the landfill?
Thanks, Gina. So Wellington City Council is committed to reducing waste to landfill. We have a council that is strongly committed to this, and our current activities in support of this include the building of the new sludge minimisation facility at Moa Point, which will see wet sludge diverted from the southern landfill. So that'll be a great start. We've also got a number of initiatives underway that we will be planning as part of our waste management and minimisation plan, resource recovery, as well as curbside recycling reviews. So it is a collective responsibility. Wellington City Council isn't going to be able to do this by itself. It does require participation across residents, businesses, central government. Some of you will be aware that central government has just released a discussion document called Transforming Recycling, which is looking at a number of areas. We just got that submission signed off today by council. So I'm confident that we're going to be seeing a significant reduction in waste over the next decade, which will mean that we're going to actually hopefully be well on the way to phasing out the need for landfills in the future.
And to pick up on Stefan's point, Siobhan, with the aim of potentially even closing the landfill before its before its lifetime is complete.
Yeah.
I've got another question actually for you, Siobhan, from Mike. Why is the removal of sludge so important to further waste diversion from the southern landfill?
So given that we currently produce around 15,000 tonnes of sludge a year, and we need to mix that with 4 parts waste, that's why it's so important that we find an alternative solution to dealing with that sludge. That basically then unlocks that potential for us to really pursue those waste minimisation activities with gusto, and ensure that we can actually really start making a dent in the amount of waste material that is disposed of in any landfill, whether it's in our southern landfill or whether the option to close the landfill and then ship it elsewhere is determined. So it's essential that we treat our sludge differently to the way we treat it now.
Thank you. The next question is for George. George, Nicola wants to know, in terms of waste to energy, what are the minimum volumes required to operate versus the current volumes?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Nicola. I think it's really important to note that first of all, only about 60%
Sorry, we've just lost you there for a second, George.
of current volumes. And that's about 80,000 tonnes per year. And that's at the lower limit of where the plant would be economically viable. And that's one of the concern with this type of technology can inhibit waste minimisation. So if the volumes get too low, you might have to import waste to feed the beast, as Stefan said. Back to you.
Unfortunately, you were breaking up quite a lot through that response, George. I don't know whether perhaps, Stefan, that you could sort of reiterate the point that George was making, if your audio is working better than George's was. Or perhaps we'll just move on to the next question from Stefan. How are you planning to communicate the urgency of reducing waste from households going to the landfill?
Sorry, could you just repeat the question again?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. How are you planning to communicate the urgency of reducing waste from households going to the landfill?
Well, this is all part of our waste management and minimisation plan development, and we'll be starting that journey within the next few months as we carry out a waste assessment. And then we'll be consulting on the WMMP, the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan, in 2023.
Okay, great. The next question is from Chris, and it's one that we might need to direct to our technical expert, Rob. Rob, Chris is wanting to know what environmental damage, contamination of a Fero stream and its tributary.
Hi. For the pig generating bush, it's limited to the eastern bank. The remaining areas are really grass, and they were formed as part will be required to have some form of mitigation plan, potentially a planting plan, and to another area. Fero stream is a significant uncovered, one of the last uncovered streams in Wellington. So the new landfill itself membrane and a completely separate what we call dirty water collection system. Now all these designs are geared to reduce any risk of water seeping out. It will be capped with a thick layer of clay, and that would further reduce any potential of creating this dirty water, or what we call leachate. Additionally, as Stefan has pointed out, there'll be a sediment pond and a wetland area, and that will treat any clean water that runs off and around the landfill and make sure that it's treated and clean enough to discharge back into the stream.
Thanks very much for that, Rob. Now, George, we'll come back to you, and hopefully we've got better audio quality this time. Just going back to Nicola's question about what are the minimum volumes required to operate versus current? See if we've got audio connection there.
This is your IT host. No, we're still not getting audio connection from him. So carry on to the next question, Gina.
Okay, well, excellent. Okay, the next question. I'll find one that's not for George. Here's a question from Craig to Stefan. Would the council be conducive to a third party build, own or operate waste to energy plant?
So I suppose if this option is selected as the preferred option, then we would explore all procurement and operator models associated with that option.
Okay. And another question for Rob from Uli. Uli would like to know how environmental aspects will be addressed with each option, things like rodents, smells, fumes, waste incinerator, ashes, recycling, etc. Rob, if we can get you to jump in again and answer that one.
Sure, no problem. So each solution will require some technical assessments, like, for example, ecology, water quality and air quality. And once we figure out what the impacts are, we can then look at how we can minimize them, if not eliminate these issues. And these will all form part of the consent application and part of the design that will be sent to the consenting authorities. If the measures don't line up then to the national standard or legislation, then really the simple fact is the authorities will decline our consent and we can't perform the activity we want to. But if the consent is granted, then we will be held accountable to all these conditions, and we would have to operate it in a manner that follows the agreed condition, or risk again that consenting authorities stop our activity. On top of that, we'll probably be having significant financial penalties.
Thanks, Rob. Actually, while we've got you there, Rob, could you just recap quickly your response to the earlier question about the environmental damage and the waterproof liner, because there was we were losing the audio a wee bit through your response earlier, so it might be useful for our audience if we just recap that one quickly.
Sure. For the waterproof liner and for the environmental damage, all of that will be based All of it will be as part of the design, and it will be also as part of the consent documentation that will go through the territorial authorities. And all these elements will be considered as part of our consent application and granting of the consent.
Which will be done by the regional council as opposed to the city council.
Both parties will have authority to grant the consent, but most of the discharge to water, air, and to land will be dealt through the Greater Regional Council.
Right. All right, we'll come back to you, George, and we'll see if we can get a response to this question for Nicola. So what are the minimum volumes required to operate versus the current?
Great. Hopefully it's third time lucky.
Yes.
So basically the proportion of waste that is currently going to landfill that can be processed by a waste to energy incineration plant is about 60%. That's about 80,000 tonnes per year. And that's at the lower limit of what makes this kind of plant economically viable. So if the volumes were to go lower than that, you'd have to actually either import waste or run it less efficiently. And so as Stefan was saying earlier on, it's about feeding the beast. And so we need to make sure that those minimum volumes are met. That's one of the limitations of this kind of technology. Thank you. Back to you, Gina.
Excellent. Actually, I've got another question for you, George, this time from Tom. How and who is being collaborated with currently for emerging technologies research into solutions for landfills?
You know, certainly as Wellington City Council, what we have done is engaged a range of specialists who have expertise in this field. So that includes Becca and their partners. So their partners who have I guess a global oversight, all different options. And one of them is a specialist in waste to energy technologies. So they've been engaged in this whole process, which gives us confidence that we've got the right technology that's been offered here. Thank you, Gina.
We'll keep you there, George. We have another question, a follow-up about the waste to energy plant. Have you considered making the waste to energy plant a national facility, enabling it to continue for longer, as there will be a consistent food source for the hungry beast?
Sorry, I just missed part of the question there, Gina. Can I just get you to repeat that?
Yeah. Have you considered making the waste to energy plant a national facility, enabling it to continue for longer, as there will be a consistent food source to feed it?
I think that's a great idea, you know, because these things do have minimum volumes. If we talk about, again, the principles of what materials are best to be, I guess, processed by this kind of technology, there are also other options too. So if I just take it back to like organic materials could go through a waste to energy plant, but also can go through other technologies like anaerobic digestion or composting, and you can put it back into soil. So there are all these sort of pros and cons. It's all about scale and also location of end markets. So I think if you talk about it regionally, having a regional facility, there are certainly economies of scales to be gained with that.
Okay, thanks for that. Stefan, a question for you from Angela. Why did you favour examples that already operate in New Zealand?
I think the key thing here is around the success of the option. So we've only got a limited time frame to get a solution in place, and looking at options that maybe are successful in other areas or other countries would have potentially different consenting implications for us here in New Zealand. So we're really looking at proven technology that is suitable to the New Zealand environment.
Okay, thank you. Siobhan, if I can come back to you, a question from MG. Will Wellington City Council offer more recycling options for households, businesses, in the way of products, big and small, to be recycled instead of going to the landfill?
Yes, so over time we will. As I said, as part of us reviewing the waste management and minimisation plan, we're going to be looking for new opportunities to divert waste from going to landfill. including diverting food waste, given that organics represents about 1/3 of residential and commercial waste going to landfill. Also, as I touched on before, the government is really making a step change in terms of what they're trying to achieve through their transforming recycling document that they put out recently, which we've just completed submission on. So they're looking at introducing a container return scheme to actually improve curbside collection, as well as diverting business food waste as well. So there's a lot going on in this space. I thought I'd also just, if I can, Gina, just comment on the previous question that George had answered as well, about why couldn't we just set up a large waste to energy plant that could take rubbish and waste from all over the region and potentially nationally. One of the issues with that is that it doesn't really fulfill our circular economy aspirations, where the circular economy basically tries to reduce any waste. So we don't want to encourage even more waste, which is why it didn't come up as a preferred option, because a waste to energy really encourages more waste rather than dealing with the issue at source and actually reducing that waste and really encouraging the reusing, the recycling of our materials, so that we can keep that circular economy going.
So what you're saying is essentially we're looking for means to recycle, reduce as much as possible, so only the absolute minimum is going into the landfill.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it sounds from what you're saying as well that, you know, in terms of recycling options, we could see sort of acceleration in terms of some of those options over the next few years. There's real movement in that space.
Yeah, we've got a real tailwind behind us with this current council as well, and the aspirations around waste minimisation, and we've got a really great team working on that as well. So there's a lot of momentum, and now central government's also coming to the party. I think we can expect to see quite a significant shift in this space.
Great, thank you. Now I've got a question here from Peter. What environmental impact reductions will be used that are not being implemented at the moment with the existing operation? Is that a question for Rob, perhaps? Or can somebody else pick that one up? We got Rob coming in to answer that one. Yes, I see him popping into screen.
Hi, sorry, could you repeat that question again?
Yeah, sure. Hang on a second. Let's bring it back up for myself. So the question was from Peter: what environmental impact reductions will be used that are not being implemented at the moment with the existing operation?
From our we would, as we've seen before, we would probably line this landfill now. In the past, it was acceptable to put a pure clay liner around the landfill, but in this current standard, we would be required to basically put a what I would say a superior liner than clay. It would be a geotextile liner of some nature, and at the same time we would be looking at more sediment controls measures and a wetland polishing area before releasing water back into the environment. Furthermore, we would also be looking at probably a better gas capture system, so we would capture more methane gas to ensure that we're not accidentally releasing methane into the environment.
Great, thanks, Rob. Now I've got a question here from Mirren, who would like to know, how do the solutions fit with the Greater Wellington area city options and plans to work together? This doesn't sound like it is in a criteria. Who can answer that question for Mirren?
I'll give that one a go. So I suppose the options do fit in with the Greater Wellington area, and we've got close ties with the neighbouring councils, and we work jointly, particularly on our waste management and minimisation plan, and we'll be working on our new plan jointly with those councils. So those areas have their own landfills, and they also some businesses from those areas utilize our landfill. So actually there are benefits for us finding a good solution for our residual waste that would be knock-on effects for the wider region.
Great, thanks, Stefan. Now, Georgia, another question for you, this one from Debbie. What are the possibilities of combining options, e.g. 1 and 2, landfill with combustion to generate power or maybe heating?
That's an excellent question. Thanks, Debbie. I guess in effect, by having, if you had a waste to energy incineration plant that deals with 60% of what can be processed, then the actual balance of that, the other 40%, will need to go into a landfill anyway. If that landfill was within our city or outside our city into another region, that is in effectively combining options 1 and 2. So it really comes down to back to that waste to energy plant, the big hungry mouth. Once you've got one of those in place, you've got to keep feeding it, and it really is contrary to trying to minimise waste in the future.
Thanks very much, George. This is a question from Jenna. Can you provide more information on how food waste will be treated in the future at the landfill, e.g. reusing it and getting it ready to turn into compost? Who's best placed to answer that question?
I can answer that. We actually presented a paper to council on this where we reported back on a trial that we had conducted in Miramar of 950 households, where we did a trial of curbside collection for food waste and organics, and it was pretty successful. I think there was some good behaviour change there where people have actually started to separate that waste. We also provided some participants with worm bins, compost bins. So we're looking as well to encourage the use of home composting, because it is actually really, really easy to do to reduce that amount of waste that goes into the landfill. But we'll be looking at the results of that trial to inform our curbside collection review. One of the constraints we have at the moment is the land available for composting. So it also fits into our resource recovery business case. So you can see we've got an overarching strategy with lots of moving pieces that we're organising at the moment to really make sure that whatever solutions that we come up with as part of our waste management and minimisation plan, action plan, that they're really robust and can see us through to the future. But, you know, we also want to make a real big push on home composting as well, because as I said, it's something that I don't know how many people online do it themselves, but it's, you know, one of the things that puts people off is potentially the smell, the thought of rodents and bugs and so forth. But it is something that people can easily do if they've got a backyard, or even if they don't, with some of the modern composting equipment that's out there.
Actually, Siobhan, I've got a sort of follow-up question there for Chris in the same sort of area. What consideration is given to reducing toxic waste, such as batteries, AA's, etc., being put into the landfill?
Yes, so we've just started some recycling facilities. Stefan, can you refresh me with where these are? Are these just at the Southern Landfill, or are we putting them around the city?
Now we've got some collection areas across the city at some of our libraries and the service centre, and at the Second Treasures tip shop, where we're collecting batteries and they're being recycled. So it's a good way of getting rid of our, or ensuring that toxic waste does not enter the environment, and also it doesn't go to landfill.
Right, thank you. Now there's a question here about the long-term cost of landfilling, including post-closure management. Dollars over time, I think it is that they're asking. Who's best placed to answer that question?
Sorry, you might have to repeat that one.
Yeah, sure. What is the long-term cost of landfilling, including post-closure management? Perhaps
we may not know the answer to that one, Gina. We may have to
move on, or perhaps we need some clarity around the question. We'll come back to that one. Sure. Yeah. Another question for you, Siobhan, this one for Peter. A general question, is the council looking at how more building materials can be integrated into the recycling program?
Yeah, definitely. So as part of our procurement for major construction projects, we are now requiring Contractors are bidding for work to ensure they recycle material. So for instance, concrete from demolition, we're looking to get that recycled. We've actually got some concrete recycling facilities set up at Kiwi Point Quarry, which the council also owns. So yeah, there's some active work going on in that space. I know Let's Get Wellington Moving, who are looking at overhauling the Golden Mile, is really trying to look at some innovative ways to actually recycle some of the pavers that they're going to be changing out. So yeah, we're actively looking for those opportunities.
Right. We've got some sludge questions being directed to you, Siobhan. Has biodigestion or incineration been considered for sludge?
Yes, so we've considered a whole range of options. I think we considered around 24, and some of that can be found online. Actually, I think it's currently on the Wellington. It started off as Wellington Water Project, so the initial strategic business case is up there. The final business case will be going to council in June, so that will have all of the analysis that we've undertaken to get to the preferred option that we're going with.
Great. We've got another waste to energy question, this one from Sophie. Where would the 40% go to? Have there been conversations with other landfills where this
so in short,
thanks, George, you go.
yes, yeah. So in short, it would need to go to other landfills in the region. Have there been conversations with the operators of those landfills? Not at this stage, to that sort of detail, but at a high level, there has been interaction with the executive. I'll let maybe Stefan wants to come in on that.
Yeah, just to clarify, we have had discussions with our neighbouring landfill operators, and they are operated by our neighbouring councils. So those discussions have taken place, and in principle, they would accept that waste.
Okay, thanks, Stefan. Actually, we've got another question for you, Stefan.
Yes.
Asking about the multi-criteria analysis. Somebody's just asking that would the cost of options not be fundamental to the multi-criteria analysis? Yeah,
absolutely, and that's what I explained in my presentation, that it was an aspect that we looked at in those assessments. And just going back to the previous question, not the one just then, but the one around the aftercare costs, that was considered in the assessment of financial options for the landfill extension. So we need to consider things like putting a final cap on top of the landfill, ensuring that the gas is continued to be captured and dealt with appropriately, and the ongoing environmental maintenance takes place, and monitoring takes place of the neighbouring stream. So we do those things for our other closed landfills, and the cost, once you've capped your landfill, the costs are actually quite minor.
Okay, thanks, Stefan. We'll just jump back to sludge again. We've got another question on that. Does the sludge treatment plant have an operation life, i.e. how can it operate forever or for a period of time before moving it, etc.?
Yeah, so it will, I mean, the building will have, the building will be the biggest constraint in terms of its life, but that'll be designed for an 80 to 100-year life probably. And the rest of the units, it's a processing plant. So theoretically, you know, as long as it's maintained well, you can keep that plant going for decades. And then when it does reach end of life, it's about just changing out parts as well. So much like our wastewater treatment plants, you know, they're designed to last for decades. I'd like to say there'd be another solution, but we're going to be producing sewage indefinitely, I'd suggest. So, but there, you know, technology will advance as well. So the way we treat this will advance over the decades to come. But this is a generational investment, and we would expect it to last for at least one generation, maybe two.
Right, thanks, Siobhan. we're coming towards the end of some of the questions, but George, just got a question here from Liam. Was carbon modelling undertaken for the different options? Why was WTE included as a reasonable practical option, but not stage 4 extension?
Yeah, to the first part of the question, yes, carbon modelling was carried out for all the options considered here. It was done in 3 parts. It looked at the embedded emissions, so that's the construction of a facility, the operation of it, and also any benefits from it, any avoidable emissions. And so that was carried out for these options that were shortlisted. And in terms of the comparing waste to energy with stage 4, well, as we said earlier on, stage 4 didn't meet our core criteria, and that it couldn't be constructed within the time horizon before June 2026, and therefore that option was taken off the table.
Okay, thanks for that, George. Now, got one final question here. If I make a submission, how much influence will my feedback have on the final decision? That one for you, Siobhan?
Yeah, great question. So what happens with feedback is we all collate it, we'll come up with the themes, and we'll present that back to council. I often say when we go through these types of consultations, though, that what we're really looking for is fatal flaws. Is there a fatal flaw in the approach that we've taken? So we've had a bunch of experts doing this work over a number of months, and we've worked with a working party as well to double check our criteria and our approach. So it's really, you know, how much influence will your feedback have? Well, it depends what the feedback is, I guess. But what we're really looking for is, you know, have we made a mistake here? Is our analysis fundamentally flawed? And yeah, give us your opinion on that. That would be great. But it all gets presented to council for decision in June.
Great, and now would be a good time, I think, to, as we finish the end of the questions, to move back to the slides and I'll get you, Siobhan, to talk through how people can make a submission.
Yep. So you can go online to our Let's Talk website. The address is there, or you can send the completed form via email or free post if you print it out, or you can pop it off to any Wellington City Library or Arapaki Managed Service Centre as well. So our submissions will be closing on the 15th of May. And from there, next slide, please. So from there, we're looking at late submissions closing on the 18th of May. And then between 19th and 25th of May, we'll be having our annual plan oral hearing. So should you want to submit to council and be heard by council, there'll be an opportunity for you to do that. And you can indicate that in your submission if you'd like to make an oral submission as well. We have a council meeting on 1st of June to be an annual plan meeting, which will there be presenting all the feedback, discussing, and then finally the final decisions will be made on the 30th of June.
Great, thanks, Siobhan. Before we close tonight's webinar, I want to remind you of a few things and say a huge ngā mihi thank you to several people. Firstly, remember to make your submissions either online or via free post, and remember that if you want to speak at the oral hearings, to note this in your submission. Secondly, thank you very much to our panel for your time and to the staff who've supported this webinar tonight. A recording of the webinar will be posted on the Let's Talk Wellington website as soon as possible after the webinar. It does take some time to edit and caption, but you'll be able to see that there in a few days. You'll also be able to read more information on the website, plus make a submission or find out where to get a form if you want to fill it out yourself. The website address is www.letstalk.wellington.gov.nz/southern-landfill. Finally, thank you for attending tonight, for listening to our speakers and the panel, and for your questions. We really value your participation. Good evening. Kia pai te pō.